Warhammer 40,000 is intrinsically right-wing. A statement that I should think would not have been overly controversial, really. I mean, come on. It is a setting where even the most progressive and good, heavy quotation marks intended faction, the Tau, are a hyper-authoritarian absolute caste system state that uses armies of fanatically loyal, indoctrinated soldiers to enforce their worldview on quite literally everyone. And the closest thing you could find within the far-flung future with a resemblance to today's left-wing political values, well, it would be discovered perched atop a spire on Commorog. And I'm not kidding. Anywho, before I go off on today's topic, allow me to present the casus belli for this evening's elucidations. As is ever so common these days, my grievance was discovered on Twitter, with a pleasant Kenobi here asking, why is Warhammer so toxic? Largely, it's because of people like you, Kenobi. No, seriously, I always repeat this point every time this comes up, but before progressivism, there was no sign on GW's door saying no blacks, gays, or Jews. Games Workshop did not discriminate against anybody but the poor. But after the progressives, it became, if you agree with us, you are welcome, if not, you will not be missed. That is what turned what was once the single most welcoming geekdom community I have ever seen into today's, quote, toxic state. But we're not going to go back over that here. The funny part is that one of the commentators explained to Kenobi that the reason why there are so many people he disagrees with in 40k is because it is indeed a masculine setting, and does thus indeed not mesh very well with gay race communism. Pretty simple, really. I then expanded on this by stating the obvious. 40k is a right-wing setting. Furthermore, it is explicitly anti-progressive. This then made quite a few people with a grand total of 72 brain cells and a biscuit between them very upset, making me in turn very, very pleased with myself. And we will use their nonsense for fun debunking later on, but first, having received an excuse as good as any to dive into this topic, I shall. For Warhammer 40,000 is absolutely, intrinsically, right-wing. It could not be otherwise. Now, to adequately explain this position, I am first going to have to talk about what I mean when I use the terms left and right. For whilst I am sure by now all of you have a conceptual understanding of these terms, we are going to be talking about broad morality, values, and in turn politics here. And I'm going to bring up a more firm definition, so I feel it is necessary to properly go over the terms. So, allow me to introduce you to Jonathan Haidt. You might have heard of him before, as he is an American social psychologist that came up with a pretty brilliant way to explain why people whom a mere decade ago could have played a game of 40k at the same table and never thought a bad word about one another are now willing and eager to shove screaming feral raccoons up one another's asshole just for the privilege of hearing the screams. The explanation for this seemingly enormous divide that emerged over a very short period of time is because, he argues, we all have several moral instincts that have evolved in us as a species. And these moral instincts are valued by us more or less based on our own complex preferences, without having to spell it out. So whilst you have a long and complicated reason for liking something, based on your brain chemistry, experiences, the way you were raised or influenced by society, etc., 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 your brain obviously does not rehash all of that information every time. And so you simply like that thing. You have a general preference. These preferences then become pretty stridently entrenched over the years, and so when challenged we tend to become combative, often for reasons that we can't quite articulate. Haight then further suggested that we could boil these preferences down to a handful of moral taste buds, like how one might enjoy salty flavors and another sweet flavors. These cores, these moral taste buds, are more or less universal, but the degree to which we value them are not, as this is what makes up our preferences, which will in turn translate into political positions, and according to the data, he appears to be correct. So let us have a look at these original 5 taste buds or values and their scores. The first is harm/care. Self-explanatory enough. This is our ability to empathize with others, act kindly and nicely, and how much we value care over harm. It evolved obviously enough to encourage and allow us to live in large groups and strengthened our overall community. Next we have fairness/cheating. This evolved in order to give us an instinctual intuition of when resources or privileges were not distributed fairly, when somebody was cheating the system. And so as an extension to that, when action was needed to rid ourselves of those simply taking advantage of us. Then we have in-group/out-group, or loyalty and disloyalty. Again, fairly obviously. A large cohesive society that feels like it shares a common purpose and can act as a unified whole will have a distinct advantage over any group that can not. Basically, it's the exact opposite of diversity is our strength. Then we have authority/subversion. This is the understanding and the respect of hierarchies. It extends out of the loyalties point by imbuing legitimate hierarchies that have not already been neutralized by the Fairness Foundation with totemic authority. Though, mind you, this should not be mistaken for a preference for authoritarianism. Again, an illegitimate organization, a tyrannical authoritarian one, would already be perceived as such by the fairness preference. Nor should it be viewed as a simple liking of authority regardless of its nature, as an illegitimate authority would not be viewed as, again, a legitimate authority, and thus undermined by the previous foundations. Nor should this be viewed as a simple liking of authority regardless of its nature. Let me give you an example to further elucidate this. Authority might be the automatic respect for a police officer's position and, in turn, his authority, because we have all agreed that the police is a worthwhile organization. Thus, it is legitimate. Meanwhile, subverting that organization solely for one's own gains by using its authority against one's enemies is not a respect for authority. It is the opposite. It is subversion, and is therefore no longer legitimate. Should, for example, a force subvert the police and use its authority solely for its own purposes and against its opponents, be they political or whatever else, then it is no longer the legitimate organization we created. It is no longer the neutral organization intended to enforce the laws that we all agreed upon. Instead, it has become a partisan tool, which again, therefore, is not legitimate. That is why a respect for authority and a liking of the authority versus subversion does not mean you like all authority. And finally, we have purity and degradation. This comes from our evolved ability to feel disgust in order to protect us from unsanitary conditions or rotten and spoiled food. It later also doubled up to allow us to imbue certain things with automatic value. Initially, this was things like, oh, those red berries over there are delicious, and despite their bright coloring, is not poisonous. And because we imbued that particular berry with this automatic value, nobody then, in 10 years' time, would look at the berries and go, but why are we eating them? They're red. You could simply then slap them on the back of the head and go, yeah, but we know these are good. Like, what the hell's wrong with you? And this would later on then also extend to morality, like thou shalt not kill, as an ethical shorthand for good and bad things without again needing to reiterate why all the time. Instead of explaining why we shouldn't be killing each other, we simply say, this holy book says we shall not kill. God says we shall not kill. It is wisdom. It is something that is known, Khaleesi. And this, of course, later again evolved to include ideas or behaviors we do not like as well, like extremism or deviant sexual behaviors. With these values and their explanations in mind then, how did self-professed conservatives and liberals, so people who claim to be these things, right and left-wingers if you will, score on this test? Well, the conservatives, the right-wingers, were shown to value all of the above to a similar level, with the greatest deviation being purity at 2.89 and authority at 3.28 on a sliding scale of 0 to 5, where anything above 2.5 in essence would be the positive side of the scale. Meanwhile, the liberals show a massive divide, valuing harm/care and fairness very highly at 3.62 and 3.74, so higher than the right valued authority. Meanwhile, the left value in-group/out-group or loyalty and authority very little in the negative at 2.07 and 2.06. And more interesting still is that they completely reject purity at a 1.27 score. Again, if we view this as a sliding scale, then the reason for our current day political divide becomes very apparent very quickly. The right values all of the moral foundations to a positive extent, as in above, 2.5, but allows none of the values to completely overrule the other, with the greatest spread, authority versus purity, only having a 0.39 points difference. So whilst the right values the judgment of a trusted institution higher than it does tradition, the one by no means completely overrules the other. There are times to the right when fairness must bend to purity, and there are times when purity must bend to fairness, etc., etc. But the left places all of its positive values on only 2 points: harm/care and fairness, whilst loyalty and authority are at best ignored as irrelevant at 2 points, and purity is outright rejected at 1.27. In other words, the left can only connect with the right on 2 out of 5 of these key core moral values, and as they only see harm/care and fairness, the other 3 must therefore necessarily be viewed simply as obstacles to the furthering of harm/care and fairness. Thus, the left would never accept that sometimes purity must triumph over fairness, or that authority must triumph over care. And to do so then would to them be nothing short of the blackest of evils, as they do not even recognize these moral values, or at the very least, find them inconsequential by comparison. This obviously has a lot of implications for our real world, as this means that when we look at our opposition and think, man, this dude does not even live in the same reality as me, that is because they quite literally do not. Allow me to present you with a poignant example. Remember the God Emperor Trump float from Italy? The right embraced that with gusto. They loved it. To the right, it was the coolest thing ever, and symbolized pretty much everything awesome. But the dude who created it, a very progressive liberal sculpture, he intended it as a critique. Just take a second to wrap your head around that. This enormous golden god creation of authority and spectacle was, in the eyes of a liberal, a scathing critique. Or, worse still, as the Huffington Post described it, terrifying. A more clear demonstration of the moral values could not possibly exist. For whilst the right sees authority, loyalty, and purity in a float modelled after the God Emperor of mankind, all the left sees is that it does not have care. It is not soft nor cuddly, and it certainly is not fair. This is an avatar of exceptionalism. And so to one group, it's awesome. To the other, it's terrifying. And now that we have finally defined our terms, let's bring this all back around to 40k. With these moral values in hand, we can immediately and unequivocally see that Warhammer 40k is an inherently and absolutely right-wing setting. Never mind the Imperium of Man, even the most progressive faction in the galaxy, the Tau, embrace far more of the right-wing values than the left's. Obviously, their extremely fixed caste and command system leads them to score highly in authority. They also value honor, both on and off the battlefield, where fire warrior squads create bonds of brotherhood between one another, and on the strategic field, where they bring other species into the greater good. And oh boy, the Tau score off the chart on the purity value. The entire point of the greater good is to endow the ethereals with an absolute authority based in tradition, because it was they who brought unity to the old warring tribes, and thus created the Tau as we know them to be today. And to question that value, that tradition, would be unthinkable. And fairness, oh absolutely, the Tau are very fair to their own, willing to accept their way of life. And to those, to be fair, that might one day join their empire, but to everyone else, they will lie, cheat, manipulate, and use every means at their disposal to make them see the light. And once inside of the light, well, there is no such thing as somebody taking an unequal share, because the shares are determined by the ethereals. The only left-wing value one could plausibly argue that the Tau hold would be valuing care over harm, as they really do care about the welfare of their people, and even outsiders, though only up until the point where they refuse the greater good one too many times. And then it's off to the sterilization camps. And if we were to add in the sixth, later developed moral value of liberty, well, again, absolute caste system. Let's just say that it would not improve the left's position. And once more, I was not joking about the Komarog thing at the beginning of the video, as quite literally the most left-wing faction in 40k are the Dark Eldar, as they are consistently subversive, with every Drukhari constantly trying to better his position in the hierarchy by undermining it and everyone else's position. Their purity score would rival even that of our modern day left, as there is nothing they would not defile to get ahead. There is nothing they value of tradition beyond, I guess, keeping Slanesh out. And amusingly, they are probably the closest thing to a liberty-oriented faction in 40k, as every Drukhari seeks the maximum personal liberty for himself, and sometimes even achieves it at the expense of everybody else, via things like independent slaver bands, tiny cabals, small troops of witches, or even unaffiliated homunculi. And in-group/out-group and/or loyalty, well, the Dark Eldar don't merely have a lack of loyalty to one another, it is generally expected and viewed as a virtue to betray anyone you can and get away with it. Hell, the only reason their loyalty score would be even a whisker above the Skaven is the addition of the caveat, betray anyone you can get away with betraying, rather than the Skaven version of just do it for the lulz. Now, granted, they certainly fail the care-harm foundation, which is pretty key to the left, but this still leaves the Dark Eldar with far more points in common with the left than any other faction. I mean, shit. Even Chaos values loyalty and authority. Its very foundation, after all, is armies of fanatically loyal cultists. And of course, applying these fundamentally human values to any species in 40k is kinda missing the point. Duh. But as we are discussing the universe as a science fiction entity that we humans enjoy, we'll forgive the stretch for now. And so, with this laid out then, it is simply impossible to view 40k as anything but a right-wing setting. It embraces all of the values of the right, even as it rejects those of the left. Even going so far, of course, as to reject the very idea of progress. The Eldar are a dwindling species that will never make anything truly new ever again. The Imperium has near completely abandoned the promises of reason and technological advancement, preferring to rediscover the lost fragments of humanity's technological golden age. The only species that could be said to actually embrace progress is the Tau, and even then only technologically, as they do so in order to better persuade and conquer all other life and indoctrinate it in its own absolute philosophy. And this is, of course, an inescapable reality of the 41st millennium. The Imperium isn't oppressive and cruel for the shits and giggles of it. It is because it is a decaying empire, shattered by betrayal. It is a realm of men under assault by gods, and intergalactic predators, and super ancient space skeletons. No amount of peace, love, or compassion is going to save a single human being. Only ruthless militarism and endless armies of men wielding trillions of mass-produced lasguns and bayonets will ensure even a chance of survival. Or, as I say here, as we move into the no, really, the left genuinely does not understand this section of the video, the 40k universe is not a dark galaxy filled with horrors because it is right-wing. It is a right-wing because it is a dark galaxy filled with horrors where to be anything but is to be dead. And again, just to demonstrate to you that no, the left really genuinely does not understand or grasp these qualities, let me show you some highlights here. Beginning with the obvious, of course. Leia Minis, why are you still around? Genuine question. The left is incapable of being genuine, incidentally. It feels like you people never enjoy anything. All you ever do is be pissed at stuff that really isn't that important. We've already gone over the definition of a tourist on this channel, somebody who places their politics above their hobby. And this is the definition of it. You don't think it's that important because to you, it's irrelevant. You have a greater good, and the hobby is at best a vehicle to propagate that greater good. To me, the hobby is a goal in and of itself. I do not partake in Warhammer 40,000 for any greater goal. To me, when I am reading about 40k, when I am talking about 40k or playing a 40k game, I am doing so simply to do those things. And so those things are actually really important to me because I enjoy them, and I wish to keep them separate and protected from other nonsense. Not to mention, of course, if it really is not that important, then let me simply have my way, and you can go away. And to further illustrate some tourism, Mustard Revenge, claiming so hard that 40k is right-wing is such an own goal. The Imperium is a corrupt, dying corpse with no hope of returning to its former glory. That is correct. The Imperium once embraced many of the progressivist ideals, in fact. The Imperium was once, perhaps, at the very least far closer than it is today, left-wing. This was the golden era of technology, when 40k was Star Trek. And then the Machine Wars began, shattering that once glorious human federation and reducing humanity to desperate scraps that barely survived. And that was merely the hors d'oeuvre to the moment when the sky tore open and demons rained forth from hell. Yeah. The Imperium was not brought to the edge of dying because it was right-wing. However, the only reason why the Imperium is today still, after 10,000 years, a dying entity instead of one long dead and forgotten, is because it became right-wing. And this is repeated a lot of times, by the way. Enigma Encoder, which is a ironic name considering. 40k isn't inherently right-wing, dude. One need only look at the tech priests to realize that the Imperium are not the good guys. Hell, it is bigotry is openly holding it back from a war-winning alliance with some Xenos races. The fuck did gay people do to you anyway? Who even knows what that last part is about? But 40k being the good guys. No, the Imperium is the good guys for the very simple reason that the Imperium is keeping itself alive. This is enough to make it an inherently moral act, and thus anything done in order to keep humanity alive is good. Merely surviving in the 41st millennium is a good thing, and there is nothing virtuous or positive or advantageous to simply embrace extermination. No amount of love, peace, or harmony is going to save you from a carnifex's belly, but a battle cannon just might. And as for bigotry holding them back from a war-winning alliance, you could not be a greater tourist if you tried. Firstly, the Imperium already allies with Xenos races when practicable and when necessary. They will side with Eldar versus Chaos. They will side with Tau versus Tyranids. If there is a greater evil out there, then yet again pragmatism will prevail, because unlike the left, the right is able to embrace all of the core moral values. It can look at the Eldar and think, you are a danger to me, but not as big a danger as Chaos is, and so work together. As for a war-winning alliance, what Xenos race is the Imperium going to join together with to win the war? The Eldar, the fading remnants of a once great people, the Tau, an insignificant speck barely visible on the galactic map of the Imperium, the Orcs, Tyranids, Necrons, What xenos species? You have no idea what you're talking about, because you are incapable of looking at 40k from the perspective of somebody living in that universe. And as yet another example of the left's inability to understand terms. Painting and playing with plastic resin army men is masculine, I swear, stop laughing at me. Yes. Playing war is probably the single most masculine thing out there. Engaging in a hyper-competitive game with deep and complex rules requiring strategy and tactics and dedication to understand and play, not to mention the self-discipline to paint an entire army of miniatures, is absolutely masculine. And the fact that you can't understand that, well, says a lot more about you, Porku, than about anybody else. And finally, this one honestly is nowhere near as bad as one, because the other ones are malicious, whereas Saxi Mafone here comes across more as ignorant than malicious. So all the female characters in positions of power and canon gay and trans characters aren't progressive. Correct, they are not. 40k was a boys-only thing back when only boys liked guns and shooting. Now that other people are allowed to like those things, it grew, and it grew organically, which is rare. Now again, 40k has not attracted a vast female audience. This is simply untrue. Nor are there hordes of trans people thronging to get into the GW stores. It has absolutely grown, but far more so amongst yet more white straight men than any other demographic. But let's address this here. One of the left's greatest achievements was weaponizing identity and creating identity politics to say, hey, you're a woman, you're a gay, you're a trans, that means you're left. Regardless of any other political positions you may hold, regardless of any other opinions you may hold, you are left because the right hates you, even as they live in 2024, where judgment against another, where discrimination is illegal, where men and women have not only the same rights and privileges, but frequently women have more, where we have laws specifically privileging gay and trans people in many nations via things like hate crimes, which give them additional legal protections. The left is not your only option, and the very fact that the left has managed to brainwash so many into thinking this is true is remarkable. It is identity and victim politics at its foremost. As no, having a female character in 40k is not in and of itself progressive, because being a woman is not inherently political. I mean, I don't... It's one of those we do not live in the same reality conversations, yet again. It is not inherently progressive to be gay or trans, and having characters like these exist in 40k is also not inherently progressive. Although, in a majority of cases today, due to the politicization of these terms, introducing a gay character or a trans character or ze pronouns is probably a political act. Yes. That is a result of the left wing's constant push towards politicization. It is because of its demand that everything must be political that this is even an issue. Again, no one objected to Eowyn slaying the Witch King. No one objected to the black female muses in Hercules. The reason why so many people look upon the addition of such characters today is because we know they have not been added organically. The left has told us this time and time again, that it is doing this for a political purpose, for a political reason, that in 40k, the demand for female space marines is a purely political one. And this, of course, is why, again, gatekeeping is the only answer. We stand against people who have either been tricked into believing that their very gender makes them political, or we are standing against the people who brainwashed the former in the first place. There can be no coexistence with the modern day left, because they are incapable, as we have seen today, of understanding the majority of our moral values. The only thing we can do is to yet again enforce upon the left the tyranny of neutrality, where you are simply told to shut up about your race, to shut up about your pronouns, and shut up about your progressivism. And as it turns out, the only way we're ever going to get back there again is through a nice, big, solid dose of right-wingism. So once more, gatekeep, always. And until next time, I have been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.